There is a moment most people experience at least once in their life, but almost no one talks about it. You're standing in a room full of people, friends, colleagues, family. Everyone is talking, laughing, reacting, and yet something feels wrong. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a quiet, disturbing absence. You look into someone's eyes, and although they smile, respond, even appear engaged, you feel nothing coming back. No depth, no presence, no spark. It's not hostility, it's not cruelty, it's not even sadness, it's emptiness. Most people brush this feeling away immediately. They tell themselves they're imagining things, that they're tired, that they're being judgmental. Society has trained us to believe that all humans are identical on the inside, that whatever differences exist are only cultural, emotional, or intellectual. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if human beings are not equally awake? What if some people are not fully here? This idea feels dangerous, not because it's cruel, but because it threatens one of our most comforting beliefs, that everyone shares the same inner reality. For centuries, philosophers, mystics, and esoteric traditions quietly suggested something unsettling, that being human biologically is not the same as being human spiritually, that consciousness is not guaranteed, that awareness is something that develops or doesn't. And in the modern world, where imitation replaces reflection, where trends replace thought, and where identity is copied instead of discovered, this question becomes impossible to ignore. Are all people equally conscious, or do some simply function? To explore this, we have to step away from modern assumptions and look at an older, more uncomfortable framework, one that views human life not as a finished product, but as a process. In this view, a human being is not born complete. They are born with potential, potential for awareness, potential for depth, potential for something that goes beyond instinct, habit, and social programming. But potential is not destiny. Think about how many people live their entire lives without ever questioning why they exist. They follow routines, inherit beliefs, repeat opinions, chase approval, and avoid silence at all costs. Their lives are busy, but strangely hollow. They react, but rarely reflect. They speak, but rarely listen inward. They feel emotions, but only those triggered from the outside. Pleasure, fear, anger, desire. There is nothing wrong with these experiences, but they are not evidence of inner depth. Animals feel them. Machines can simulate them. What defines a fully conscious human is not reaction, but self-awareness. The ability to observe oneself, to question one's impulses, to sense meaning beyond survival. And here is where the disturbing idea emerges. What if some people never develop this inner observer? What if for them there is no inner silence, only noise, no inner compass, only external signals? They wake up, they perform their roles, they consume, repeat, compete, and sleep. And at no point do they ask, who is the one experiencing all this? From the outside, they appear perfectly normal, often successful, often charismatic, sometimes even admired. But internally, their lives are shallow streams, moving quickly, reflecting nothing. Ancient traditions describe such individuals not as evil, cursed, or broken, but as unfinished, not monsters, not villains, but beings operating without a fully awakened inner center. This is not a moral judgment. It is an existential one. Just as not every acorn becomes a tree, not every human life develops the same depth of consciousness. And this explains something many sensitive people feel but struggle to articulate, why conversations feel empty, why crowds feel lonely, why social spaces feel loud but lifeless. It explains why genuine connection feels so rare, and why When it happens, it feels almost sacred because true connection does not happen between roles. It happens between awarenesses, between two beings who are actually present. The modern world, however, is optimized for the opposite. It rewards speed, repetition, conformity, and surface-level engagement. It trains people to avoid introspection and to fear silence. Silence reveals depth, and depth demands responsibility. So most people never go there. They live externally. And over time, something subtle happens. If a person never turns inward, never questions, never reflects, never seeks meaning beyond comfort, the inner world does not grow. It remains dormant, not dead, but unused, like a muscle that was never exercised. And eventually, the person no longer feels its absence. They become comfortable living entirely on the surface of life. This is why the idea that everyone is conscious in the same way feels comforting, but false. We are equal in dignity, equal in worth, but not equal in awareness. And pretending otherwise creates confusion, frustration, and quiet despair for those who do feel deeply. If you've ever felt like you were living in a world that feels strangely hollow, if you've ever felt misunderstood, not because you were different, but because you were awake, if you've ever sensed that something essential is missing in modern life, you are not imagining it, you are perceiving a difference most people are taught to ignore. And this brings us to the deeper question we must now face. If consciousness is something that develops, if inner depth is something that grows over time, then what determines whether it awakens or remains dormant? Is it education, culture, trauma, choice, or something far older, something rooted in the long arc of human development itself? In the next session, we'll explore a radical framework that sees humanity not as a single uniform group, but as beings at different stages of inner evolution. And once you understand it, you may never look at people or yourself the same way again. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like the video. It helps this message reach others who are quietly searching for the same answers. If consciousness is not guaranteed, if inner depth develops rather than appears automatically, then the most uncomfortable question follows naturally. Why are people so different on the inside? Not in personality, not in intelligence, but in depth. Why does one person feel tormented by questions of meaning, truth, and purpose, while another seems perfectly content repeating routines until death? Why does silence feel sacred to some and unbearable to others? Why do a few feel crushed by injustice they didn't cause, while many remain untouched by suffering they witness daily? Modern psychology struggles with this question. It explains behavior, trauma, conditioning, but it cannot explain why some people awaken despite comfort, while others remain asleep despite suffering. To understand this difference, we must abandon the idea that humanity is evolving only biologically, because biologically we are almost identical. What differs radically is consciousness. Ancient philosophies described human development as a vertical process, not a horizontal one. Not everyone stands on the same inner level at the same time. Humanity, in this view, is not a flat surface, but a ladder, and people occupy different rungs. Some live almost entirely at the level of instinct. Others operate at the level of social identity and imitation. A smaller number awaken to reflection, self-observation, and moral tension. And very few reach genuine inner autonomy, where they are no longer ruled by fear, approval, or unconscious desire. Most never climb at all. They remain exactly where society places them. This ladder is invisible because it does not show on the body. Two people can share the same job, the same education, even the same values, yet exist worlds apart internally. One is aware, the other is functioning, and this is why the world often feels upside down. Those who feel deeply are told they are overthinking. Those who question are told they are negative. Those who withdraw from shallow systems are told they are antisocial. Meanwhile, those who repeat slogans are rewarded. Those who follow trends are celebrated. Those who never question are called normal. But consciousness has never been democratic. Throughout history, only a minority of humans have ever truly awakened to their inner life. The rest lived, worked, reproduced, and died without ever stepping outside the machinery of existence. This does not make them evil, it makes them asleep. Sleep is not a moral failure, but remaining asleep forever has consequences. When a being does not develop inner awareness, their life becomes mechanical. Their choices are not chosen, they are triggered. Their beliefs are not examined, they are absorbed. Their emotions are not understood, they are discharged. They do not live life, life happens through them, and this explains why crowds behave differently than individuals, why mobs lose conscience, why systems become cruel without anyone feeling responsible. Because when consciousness is absent, responsibility dissolves. A person without inner awareness does not ask, "Should I?" They ask only, "Is this allowed?" or "Is this expected?" This is how atrocities occur without monsters. This is how injustice becomes ordinary. This is how emptiness becomes normal. But here is the crucial point most people misunderstand. Awakening is not about intelligence. Some highly intelligent people are deeply asleep. They use their minds only to justify desires, defend identities, or dominate others. Their intellect serves the ego, not awareness. And some people with simple lives possess extraordinary depth. They feel life intensely. They reflect. They sense meaning in silence. They suffer, but their suffering refines them instead of hardening them. Awakening is not about knowledge. It is about attention. Where attention goes consistently, consciousness grows. Those who never turn attention inward remain empty, not because they are cursed, but because they never cultivated the inner space where awareness forms. And this cultivation does not happen automatically with age. Many grow older without growing deeper. They mistake experience for wisdom, time for transformation, memory for meaning. But awareness requires friction. It is forged through discomfort, contradiction, and inner conflict. Through moments when a person feels something is wrong, but refuses to numb it. This is why modern life actively suppresses awakening. Distraction replaces reflection. Noise replaces silence. Consumption replaces contemplation. People are taught to scroll instead of sit, to react instead of observe, to identify instead of question. And so the latter remains unseen. Those at lower levels do not recognize higher ones. They interpret depth as weakness, silence as emptiness, detachment as arrogance. And those who awaken often feel isolated, not because they are superior, but because they are out of sync with the dominant frequency of the world. This isolation is not accidental. Awareness separates. It always has. But awakening is not an endpoint. It is a responsibility. Once a person begins to see, they cannot unsee. They become aware of their own unconscious patterns and the unconsciousness of others. They feel the weight of choice more heavily. They suffer more acutely. But they also gain something rare: inner freedom. Freedom from blind imitation, freedom from constant validation, freedom from living someone else's script, and this freedom terrifies those who do not possess it, which is why awakened individuals are often mocked, ignored, or attacked, not because They are dangerous, but because they expose something others are avoiding. They remind the world, silently, that another way of being is possible. Now here is the most important realization of all. No one is fixed forever. Awareness can awaken late. Depth can emerge after long dormancy. A life can change direction even after decades of sleep, but it requires something rare. The willingness to suffer consciously, to feel emptiness without numbing it, to question identity without clinging to it, to face meaninglessness without escaping it. Most people refuse this step. They choose comfort over truth, certainty over depth, belonging over authenticity. And so they remain where they are, not punished, not condemned, simply unchanged. In the final session, we will confront the hardest question of all. If awakening is possible, if consciousness can grow, then how do you know whether you are asleep or beginning to wake up? And what are the quiet signs that separate a life that merely functions from a life that is truly alive? If you want to continue this journey, make sure you subscribe to the Quiet Paradox. The final session will reveal what most people never dare to look at within themselves. By now, one truth should feel impossible to ignore. Not everyone lives at the same depth of consciousness. Not everyone is equally awake, and not everyone who looks alive truly is. But this raises the most uncomfortable question of all. Where do you stand? This is not a question you answer with words, not with beliefs, not with identity. It is answered through patterns. Quiet, repeated, undeniable patterns. Because awakening does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself subtly, often through discomfort. The first sign of awakening is not peace, it is restlessness, a deep, persistent sense that something about ordinary life feels insufficient. Not tragic, just incomplete. You may succeed, socialize, achieve goals, and still feel an unshakable tension inside. Not anxiety, not depression, but a pressure. As if your life is asking a question you haven't yet learned how to answer. Awakened people do not feel at home in shallow systems. They feel constrained by conversations that go nowhere, by routines that repeat without meaning, by values that prioritize appearance over truth. This restlessness is often misdiagnosed. People call it overthinking. They call it dissatisfaction. They call it negativity. But in reality, it is consciousness pushing outward, testing the limits of the life it inhabits. Another sign is a growing intolerance for self-deception. You begin to notice when you're lying, to others, but especially to yourself. Old habits start to feel heavy, social masks become exhausting. You can no longer fully enjoy what you once did, not because it's wrong, but because it's empty. You start craving alignment instead of approval. This is dangerous territory, because once awareness sharpens, you lose the comfort of pretending. Awakening removes anesthesia. You feel more, you see more, you suffer more honestly. But this suffering is different. It is no longer meaningless pain, it becomes information. You begin to observe your reactions instead of being possessed by them. Anger, fear, jealousy, desire, they still arise, but now there is distance. A watcher behind the emotion. That watcher is crucial. It is the beginning of the inner self. Without it, a person is ruled entirely by impulses and conditioning. With it, a person gains the ability to choose rather than react. This is where the real divide appears. Unawakened individuals avoid silence. Awakened ones seek it, because silence reveals what noise hides. When you sit alone without distraction, do you immediately reach for stimulation, or can you remain present even when discomfort arises? The inability to sit in silence is not a personality trait. It is a developmental sign. Silence exposes inner emptiness, but it also allows inner depth to form. Those who are asleep flee it. Those who are waking endure it. Another sign is a shift in values. Status loses its grip. Comparison feels hollow. Winning no longer excites you the way understanding does. This doesn't mean you abandon the world. It means you stop confusing success with fulfillment. You become more selective, not because you feel superior, but because your energy feels precious. Awakened people protect their attention fiercely, because they've learned something most never do. Where attention goes, life goes. Spend it on noise, and your inner world fragments. Spend it on awareness, and your inner world deepens. This is why awakened individuals often appear withdrawn or distant. Not cold, but deliberate. They no longer waste themselves on meaningless engagement. They are not antisocial. They are anti-emptiness. And here is the most important truth. Awakening does not make you happier. It makes you truer. Happiness comes and goes. Truth stays. You may feel lonelier at times, not because you lack people, but because you now see how rare genuine presence is. You may outgrow relationships without drama, without hatred, simply because the depth no longer matches. And this hurts. But it is also a sign of growth, because a soul that is forming cannot remain in shallow water forever. Now let's address the fear many people feel but never say aloud. What if I'm not awake? That fear itself is meaningful. A completely asleep person never asks that question. They assume they're fine. They assume the world is fine. They assume repetition is life. The moment you question your own level of awareness, something has already shifted. Awakening does not happen all at once. It unfolds in stages. First comes discomfort, then questioning, then separation, then reconstruction. Many turn back during separation. The loneliness feels too intense. The uncertainty feels too threatening. So they return to familiar identities, familiar beliefs, familiar noise. But those who continue, slowly, painfully, begin to build something rare. An inner center that does not depend on validation. A conscience that does not require permission. A sense of meaning that does not collapse when circumstances change. This is what it means to be truly alive. Not to be perfect, not to be enlightened, but to be conscious. And this is why the world feels the way it does today. So much activity, so little presence, so many voices, so little depth, so many bodies moving, so few souls awake. But here's the final truth, one that changes everything. Awakening is contagious, not through preaching, not through persuasion, but through presence. One conscious individual changes the emotional gravity of a room. One aware person introduces friction into unconscious systems. One soul that refuses to sleep quietly invites others to question. This is why awareness has always been rare and powerful. And this is why your inner work matters more than you think. Not because you'll save the world, but because you'll stop being consumed by it. So ask yourself, not with judgment, but with honesty. Do you feel this restlessness? This hunger for meaning? This resistance to living on autopilot? If you do, something in you is already awake. And once awakened, even slightly, there is no going back to sleep without cost. The question is no longer whether you are conscious. The question is, what will you do with it? If this session stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your words may help someone else realize they are not alone in this quiet awakening.